The wife's journey in the open marriage leads her to explore her own identity and sexuality, discovering new aspects of herself. She regrets her decision when she sees her husband becoming distant and less invested in their relationship. Julian and Adeline's home was always filled with laughter, shared dreams, and the comforting routine of a couple deeply in sync. But beneath the surface, a restlessness was brewing, a silent wave threatening to disturb the calm. One cool autumn evening, as they sat on their cozy, well-worn sofa, Adeline turned to Julian with a seriousness in her eyes that he rarely saw. "Julian, we need to talk about us," she began, her voice trembling slightly. Julian, a man of few words but deep emotions, looked at her with concern. "What's on your mind, Ade?" he asked, his brows furrowing. Adeline took a deep breath. "I've been feeling like we're in a rut. We love each other, yes, but there's a part of me that's yearning for something different. Something more," she said, hesitantly. Julian's heart sank. He had sensed a change in Adeline but never imagined it was this profound. "What do you mean, Ade?" he asked, struggling to keep his voice steady. "I've been thinking about us having an open marriage," Adeline blurted out, her eyes searching his for a reaction. The words hit Julian like a tidal wave. An open marriage? The concept was foreign, almost alien to him. He loved Adeline with every fiber of his being, and the thought of sharing her with someone else was unimaginable. "Why, Adeline? Aren't you happy with me?" Julian asked, a hint of pain in his voice. "It's not about happiness, Jules. It's about exploring, about knowing ourselves better." "It doesn't change how I feel about you," Adeline tried to explain, her hands nervously fidgeting with the hem of her skirt. Julian looked away, trying to process the storm of emotions inside him. He loved her, yes, but could he accept this? The silence stretched between them, heavy and uncomfortable. Finally, Julian turned back to her. "If this is what you need, Ade, I'll try to understand. But I'm not sure how I feel about it yet." "This is all so new," he said, his voice laced with a mix of love and uncertainty. Adeline reached out, taking his hand in hers. "I know it's a lot to ask, Jules. We don't have to rush into anything. Let's just think about it, talk more, and see where we stand," she suggested, a hopeful note in her voice. That night, as they lay in bed, Julian couldn't help but feel a chasm growing between them. Adeline's breathing was steady, but his mind raced with questions and fears. Could their love withstand this test? Was he enough for her? The comfort of their shared bed, once a sanctuary, now felt like uncharted territory. As the moonlight streamed through their window, casting a soft glow over their room, Julian realized that their lives were on the cusp of a significant change. A new horizon was upon them, whether he was ready for it or not. And with that thought, he finally drifted into a restless sleep. In the weeks following their conversation, Julian and Adeline embarked on their new, uncertain journey. The house, once a haven of shared experiences, now felt like a station where two travelers met briefly before heading off to explore different worlds. Adeline, driven by a mix of curiosity and a desire for something new, was the first to take a step into this uncharted territory. She met people, went on dates, exploring connections that were vastly different from what she shared with Julian. These encounters were exhilarating at first, offering a rush of novelty, but they soon began to feel hollow. Each laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes, each conversation that skimmed the surface, left her feeling more adrift. Meanwhile, Julian approached the situation with trepidation. He couldn't deny the sense of betrayal that gnawed at him each time Adeline dressed up for another date. Yet, amidst this turmoil, he found an unexpected sense of freedom. He started going out too, more out of a sense of fairness than desire. It was on one of these reluctant outings that he met Elise. Elise was different. She was vibrant, full of life, and had a way of looking at the world that intrigued Julian. Their conversations were effortless, filled with laughter and depth. With her, Julian discovered parts of himself he never knew existed. They shared interests in art and literature, and their discussions often lingered long into the night. For the first time in a long time, Julian felt a spark, something that both excited and scared him. Back home, Adeline noticed the changes in Julian. He was more distant, often lost in thought, and she could tell his mind was often with someone else. A pang of something akin to jealousy surged through her, an emotion she hadn't anticipated in her quest for liberation. One evening, as they sat across from each other at the dinner table, an awkward silence hanging between them, Adeline couldn't help but notice the subtle changes in Julian. He seemed more confident, his eyes often lighting up with an inner joy that she hadn't seen in years. "How was your evening out yesterday?" Adeline asked, trying to sound casual. "It was good. Elise and I went to a poetry reading." "It was interesting," Julian replied, his voice tinged with a happiness that he couldn't quite hide. Adeline felt a twinge in her heart at the mention of Elise's name. "That sounds nice," she said, forcing a smile. Inside, she was grappling with a whirlwind of emotions. She had initiated this open marriage, yet she wasn't prepared for the reality of Julian finding joy with someone else. As they continued their meal in silence, Adeline couldn't shake off the feeling that they were at a crossroads. The excitement she had once felt about the open marriage was now replaced by a deep sense of unease. She looked at Julian, her partner, her friend, her love, and wondered if she had made a grave mistake. That night, lying in bed, Adeline realized the gravity of the situation. The open marriage, meant to be a journey of self-discovery, was leading her down a path of self-reflection and doubt. The untrodden paths they had embarked upon were taking them further away from each other, and the fear of losing what they had was slowly creeping in. As autumn faded into a brisk winter, the dynamics of Julian and Adeline's relationship continued to evolve, each day bringing its own set of challenges and revelations. Adeline found herself in a labyrinth of introspection, questioning the very foundations of her desires and decisions. Her explorations in the open marriage, initially thrilling, had gradually become a mirror reflecting her deepest insecurities and longings. Each new encounter, rather than filling the void she felt, only seemed to deepen it. The men she met were interesting, some even charming, but none could match the depth of connection she shared with Julian. It was a realization that came with a mix of sadness and clarity. Julian, on the other hand, found a refreshing sense of self in his friendship with Elise. Their bond was growing stronger, not just as lovers but as confidants. Elise's vibrant personality and her passion for the arts rekindled a part of Julian that had lain dormant. He found himself engaging in new hobbies, reading more, and even trying his hand at painting, a long-forgotten interest. With Elise, Julian discovered sides of himself he had forgotten or never knew existed. Meanwhile, Adeline watched this transformation in Julian with a complex mix of emotions. She was happy to see him invigorated, but it also served as a stark reminder of what they once had. The sight of his newfound hobbies around their home, things he had started to share with Elise, was a constant nudge of their drifting paths. Adeline missed the intimacy of their shared interests and dreams. One day, as Adeline sat alone in their living room, surrounded by Julian's new art supplies and books recommended by Elise, the reality of their situation hit her hard. She had encouraged this openness, thinking it would bring them growth and excitement, but instead, it seemed to be pulling them apart. The room, filled with the physical manifestations of Julian's new life, felt less like their shared space and more like a gallery of their separate journeys. In a moment of solitude, Adeline reflected on her own journey. She realized that her pursuit of new experiences was less about the experiences themselves and more about filling an undefined void within her. The more she ventured out, the more she understood that what she truly sought was a deeper connection with Julian, not a replacement of it. That evening, when Julian returned home, the air between them was different. Adeline's eyes were filled with a vulnerability that Julian hadn't seen in a long time. They talked, not about their day or their plans, but about their feelings, fears, and the silent gap growing between them. "I miss us, Julian," Adeline confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. Julian looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in what seemed like ages. "I miss us too, Adeline," he admitted, his voice laced with a mix of regret and longing. They sat together, in their once familiar living room, now a collage of their separate lives, and for the first time in months, they felt a glimmer of their old connection. It was a painful yet honest acknowledgement of the distance that had grown between them, and the first step towards bridging it. The conversation that night didn't solve their problems, but it opened a door to understanding and, perhaps, healing. Winter's chill had deepened, blanketing the city in snow and bringing a reflective quiet to Julian and Adeline's home. The air inside, once thick with unspoken tensions, now carried a cautious hope after their heartfelt conversation. Julian continued to see Elise, but with a new awareness. Their relationship, enriched by genuine affection and intellectual kinship, was undeniably important to him. Yet, his recent conversations with Adeline had opened his eyes to the delicate balance between his marriage and this new connection. He found himself in a quandary, torn between the comfort of his established life with Adeline and the exhilarating novelty of his relationship with Elise. Adeline, meanwhile, had taken a step back from her own explorations. Her dates and outings had ceased, not out of obligation, but from a newfound understanding of what she truly sought. She spent her days reflecting, often gazing out the window at the snow-blanketed world, pondering the intricate dance of love and commitment. Her heart ached with a mix of regret and yearning, longing for the closeness she and Julian once shared. As the days passed, Julian's absences became more noticeable, his late returns from outings with Elise leaving a cold void in their home. Adeline tried to mask her discomfort, focusing on her own journey of self-discovery. However, the silence of the house, once a solace, now echoed with the quiet unrest of her thoughts. One particularly cold evening, as Adeline sat wrapped in a blanket, lost in thought, Julian returned home, his face flushed from the cold and eyes sparkling with an energy she hadn't seen in a long time. He spoke animatedly about his evening with Elise, about a gallery they visited, and a new artist they had discovered. Adeline listened, her heart sinking with each word. She was happy to see Julian so alive, yet it was a painful reminder of the emotional distance between them. The following day, Adeline ventured out to visit a friend, seeking a respite from the growing loneliness in her heart. Her friend, perceptive and understanding, listened as Adeline poured out her fears and doubts. "It's like we're living parallel lives," Adeline confided, "and I don't know how to merge them back together." Meanwhile, Julian found himself at a crossroads. His time with Elise was fulfilling, but the growing strain it put on his marriage was undeniable. He recognized the deep love he still had for Adeline and the life they built together. The thought of losing her, of losing the essence of their shared history, weighed heavily on him. That night, as Julian and Adeline sat together, the room felt colder, the distance between them more profound. Adeline mustered the courage to voice her feelings. "Julian, I feel like I'm losing you," she said, her voice laced with a vulnerable honesty. Julian looked into her eyes, seeing the woman he had loved and grown with over the years. "Adeline, I'm scared of losing us too," he admitted, his voice reflecting his inner turmoil. The conversation that unfolded was raw and emotional. They talked about their fears, their desires, and the uncertain future of their relationship. It was a conversation filled with tears and confessions, a cathartic release of the emotions they had both been holding back. As they talked, The snow outside continued to fall, a silent witness to the shifting tides of their relationship. The path forward was unclear, but for the first time in months, they were walking it together, hand in hand. The night was long, and the conversation difficult, but it marked the beginning of a new chapter in their lives, one where they faced their challenges together as partners. The winter snow began to thaw, signaling the arrival of spring and bringing with it a time of reckoning for Julian and Adeline. The raw conversations of the past weeks had laid bare the depths of their feelings and the complexities of their situation. It was a period of profound introspection, forcing them both to confront the reality of their relationship. In the ensuing days, Julian and Adeline found themselves navigating a delicate dance of reconnection and reflection. They spent evenings talking, sometimes till dawn, unraveling the threads of their marriage. Each conversation, laden with emotion, peeled back layers of their bond, revealing both love and loss. Julian, torn between his deep affection for Adeline and the genuine connection he had found with Elise, struggled with guilt and confusion. His heart ached at the thought of hurting Adeline, yet he couldn't deny the fulfillment he found in his relationship with Elise. It was a tug-of-war of emotions, with no clear resolution in sight. Adeline, on the other hand, grappled with her own revelations. Her journey through the open marriage had brought her face to face with her insecurities and desires. She realized that her quest for something more had led her to overlook the beauty of what she already had with Julian. Yet, the pain of feeling him drift away was a constant reminder of the distance that had grown between them. One crisp spring evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, Adeline reached for Julian's hand. "Julian, where do we go from here?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Julian looked at her, his eyes reflecting the turmoil within. "I don't know, Adeline. I love you, but I'm not sure that's enough anymore," he replied, the honesty in his voice cutting through the cool air. The conversation that followed was perhaps the most challenging they had ever had. They delved into the essence of their marriage, acknowledging the love that had brought them together and the changes that had pulled them apart. It was a heart-wrenching acknowledgement that love, sometimes, isn't enough to bridge certain gaps. As the night wore on, a painful realization dawned on them both. Their paths, once so intertwined, had diverged too far to find their way back to each other. The open marriage, intended to bring a new perspective, had instead magnified the gaps and differences that time and routine had masked. With heavy hearts, they came to the mutual, yet agonizing decision to end their marriage. It wasn't a decision born out of anger or betrayal, but out of a deep understanding of their individual needs and the recognition that they could no longer fulfill those needs together. The divorce proceedings were handled with the same respect and love that had characterized their marriage. It was a bittersweet farewell to a chapter of their lives that had brought them both joy and growth. As spring gave way to summer, Julian and Adeline parted ways, not as enemies, but as friends who had shared a significant journey. They both stepped into their new lives with a sense of gratitude for the years spent together and a hopeful outlook for the future. Their love story didn't have the ending they once envisioned, but it was a story that taught them about the complexities of love, the importance of self-discovery, and the courage it takes to let go. The final chapter of their marriage closed, not with bitterness, but with a quiet acceptance and a hope for new beginnings.